Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca.
Hello, friends. I am Cindy Thompson, and this is a Resilience Project. This is a space where stories are shared and possibilities are discovered. I invite you to partner with me in cultivating resilience among humans, one conversation at a time. In this episode, I have the privilege of meeting with Santiago Dominguez, a 24-year-old real estate photographer, high school tutor, a student of history at Vancouver Island University, and a youth coordinator at Maranatha Church in Nanaimo, BC. Santiago's family moved from Bogota, Colombia, when he was 3 years old. Santiago is also diagnosed with high-functioning autism. Through his work in youth ministry and tutoring, Santiago is dedicated to working with teenagers who are experiencing similar challenges as what he has had in the past. Sharing the gifts and challenges of his experience living with autism, Santiago will warm your heart as he narrates his story of resilience. Okay, Santiago, I am so happy to have you as one of my guests on a Resilience Project. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Today, our topic is on autism, and I am so grateful that you are willing to come on and share your experience of living with autism as a 24-year-old guy. And I have no doubt you're going to help shine a light on some things that a lot of people may not know about. And how could we unless we really hear it from someone like you? There's a lot of information out there, but what I think is really special is actually hearing from you today.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, well, I have 24 years of experience to share, full of stories and anecdotes and whatnot. So
excellent. Yeah. Oh, good. That makes for some really rich conversation then. When I think about resilience, I think about things that we go through as young people, as adults in our lives that happen around us, to us, that create some adversity. And when you're born with autism, I'm just realizing you wouldn't really know anything different. You just know who you are and how you think, how you function. Can you tell us what it was like for you, maybe where you were diagnosed and some early experiences from that?
Sure. Well, there is, I guess, something good and something dark about not knowing that there's anything wrong with you. And, the good thing is you just think you're normal, but then the bad thing is it doesn't make sense when bad things happen, right? It just feels like the entire world is against you and that they're the problem.
Sure.
And yeah, it wasn't until I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old that I ended up in the principal's office at the second school we went to, because we moved around a lot.
Okay.
And the principal suggested to my mom that I may have this relatively new mental illness considered autism. At the time, was Asperger's syndrome, right? So that's where it all began. And from that moment on, I began to understand that it's more of an issue I have with myself, that I'm not communicating well with teachers and students than with them. Whereas previously I understood that it was because they were mean and didn't let me do what I wanted.
Yeah, which I'm just thinking out loud, but a lot of us might feel like that. Surely it's somebody else. It's not us. And that was quite young then for you to come to that realization.
It wasn't exactly at that moment, though. It did take a series of years to understand. And even then, after it clicked in my head that I have this disorder, I still had to struggle with my feelings, which gets in the way of just knowing and understanding what you're going through.
Yeah. So the principal had a thought, was seeing some patterns, put that seed out to your mom that maybe. So was there a point that you went and maybe had a formal diagnosis?
Yes. Very late, though. It was a long process. I started the process when I was 6 years old. So when we came from Colombia, we immigrated into White Rock. And then from White Rock, we moved to South Surrey. That's where I got diagnosed, sort of by my principal, right? We began the process there. And then when I turned 7, 8, maybe 6, 7, around that time, when we moved to Nanaimo, and moving to Nanaimo put a stop in the whole process because we needed to find a psychiatrist. It wasn't until I was 18 that we got a full diagnosis with a doctor.
Okay, that was a long time. So in the meantime, did you maybe and your parents start to understand it a little bit, look at it for yourselves to say, if this is autism, what does this mean? And did they start to kind of approach it with that understanding, or was it waiting for that formal diagnosis?
I think my mom was a big believer. She just struggled with it. She just didn't understand why everything was difficult for me. And when the principal revealed the symptoms to her of what autism is, she's just like, that's him, that's him, that's him, that's him, that's him. And it just, to a T, listed off every single trait that I did. And she just was, she was just a believer that was it.
That's all it took for your mom to say, this is probably validating for her.
Yeah, I think that's the word she would use.
Yeah, just to understand you better. And I like that you said there's a lot of value in understanding what it is. And sometimes people don't like to be put in a box. They don't want a diagnosis because they don't want to be labeled. But like you're identifying, once you see characteristics or traits of a particular disorder, it can be validating for people to understand you're not alone. You're not the only one.
Definitely. It feels very isolating. It's always a double-edged sword because I did appreciate knowing that I wasn't the only one. But when school realizes that, they put you in classes with other students with the same disability, and it doesn't work very well because it's hard to get along with people who don't understand your feelings and can't understand your feelings.
Okay, great point. And I maybe want to just clarify for those that aren't aware, autism, it's talked about as an autism spectrum disorder. So there's people can land anywhere along that spectrum. And my understanding, Santiago, is that you're considered a high-functioning autistic person.
That's right.
So what would you want people to know from your experience?
A big part of it is what you just said around autism and how it's a spectrum. Because one of my struggles and challenges that I have with articulating what I have is that people don't believe me when I tell them I have it. It's a big, convoluted thing. I had a conversation with one of my friends who is a psychologist, or at least she studies psychology at a university, and we went to the same social gathering. And she told me that there were moments when she was in the back and she heard other friends saying that I was putting on a show, that I was just saying that I have autism, but I don't actually have it. And this kind of reflects the understanding of what autism is in the public. It's not that autism means that you can't interact with people and you fail at every capacity because you're socially inept. It's not what it means. It's simply a standard starting point at which a person can begin their understanding. Like for me, when I was young, I did exhibit more extreme autistic traits. I would have fits because things didn't go my way. I would cry because a student took a book I wanted. I couldn't rationally process another student's feelings. I would be classified as a bully for that reason. But through understanding, I was able to fill in the gaps that was left at childhood, the gaps of social knowledge. And now I can more or less relate to people on a more sympathetic and empathetic level. And I still struggle because it's not intuitive.
Yes.
But nonetheless, I can fit in, which now makes people assume that there's nothing wrong with me, right? That's the double-edged sword.
Good point. Because it's not visible. It's just in how you think. It's how you process. And would it be fair to say, sometimes it's in the absence of understanding those social cues, understanding how to interact in those social ways. And a lot of us still are learning that. But, you've obviously been working at that to learn about yourself and figure out some of those pieces that don't come naturally to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
I love that you're highlighting that piece of wanting people to know that just because you don't display it all the time in all situations doesn't mean it's not there.
That's right. It's very interesting to me because I had a friend one time, the way pulling me aside saying, I think that you're using your autism as a crutch. And it took me back because I didn't really understand what he meant. And I think what he was trying to articulate is that he believed that I was allowing my disability to define the problems that I've had instead of solving them. And I realized that it's not what I was doing. That's not what I was doing at all. But the fact that I can talk about the things that are hard for me and identify the source of the difficulty implies to people that I am not trying to solve it. And instead, I am accepting my reality. So I think that there is this complicated relationship with it where I do acknowledge that it's real and I acknowledge that it's an obstacle to overcome, but I'm not stagnant in it. But even when I'm not stagnant in it, I will not be able to convince everybody that I'm not stagnant in it because of the fact that I'm self-aware of it.
So I guess the question that comes to mind, how important is it to you? Do you have to convince everybody?
I don't have to convince everybody because that would be impossible. But these kinds of conversations are a good step in normalizing the experience that we have.
Right. So what else comes to mind in terms of some of your experiences and what you've been learning about yourself along the way as you've learned to understand it too?
Well, for instance, one of the things that I learned with educating myself on social interactions was understanding different people's points of view. I think it's really indicative of autism to fail to naturally reach a conclusion beyond your own perspective. I recognize too, this is where a lot of people tend to say like, oh, well, isn't everyone on the spectrum to some capacity? And I would say like, you could empathize with autistic people, but autistic people cannot empathize with you. And so in that sense, no, not everybody's on the spectrum, because if you were on the spectrum, you almost wouldn't be able to relate to that experience. But autism is defined to me as not being able to understand other people's points of view. And so there were instances where that happened in my life. When I was younger, for example, I failed to realize that some students were suffering and struggling with their own problems and their own issues. And it was for these reasons that they were being rude to me. And instead, I went to such an extreme to believe that their actions were entirely malicious, that I would treat them as enemies. I would see them as an antagonist that should either be destroyed or avoided.
Okay.
In hindsight, a bit frightening that I would take that stance, because I think it shows that there's potential for harm, and I think it scares people. And that's why so many people have this perspective of autism as being a threatening disorder, because people can easily go off and go into emotional extremes instead of dealing with their problems if they're not treated correctly.
Okay, good point. Well, and I'm imagining for you in those moments, when you see the world that way, it would feel like a fight or flight response. And that would be how our brains might respond when we feel threatened in some way.
Right. Fight or flight is actually the exact term I learned in high school in a course that helped me to understand autism.
Okay. And thank goodness for that just that learning along the way. And so that would be one key thing that you've discovered along the way, is that There are other perspectives, that it's not just that one lens or that tunnel vision you might get in that moment, but to slow it down and to start realizing, even if you don't understand it in the moment, that there may be other perspectives.
That's right. That's what I spent years developing. It's funny to think that simple point can take so much time to develop, but the moment I did develop it, and I think it was around grade 11 that I was able to develop it, starting at grade 9, that I was able to make friends. And that was a very pinnacle time period for me, the grades 11 and 12, because it finally was able to step out of solitude and isolation and into the more social environment.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sorry it had to be that delayed for you, because I know that as human beings, we want to belong. We want to fit in. So what was that like for you to go to school and maybe not feel like you're fitting in with your peer group, and to feel like you're part of that classroom or a specific group of friends? Or did you have that?
Not necessarily, but I did have common interests, and that's the thing that glued my friendships together at a young age. It was difficult because I wasn't able to maintain friendships, and most of my friendships that I made were almost out of necessity. Like in the autistic circle at school, we were forced to be friends because the school realized that we didn't have any friends. So they put us in similar classes and put us in extracurricular activities in order to encourage friendships, which worked, but we never got along. There was a lot of fighting and a lot of shouting. And also, I found that the way that I made friends in elementary school was to find people that had similar interests to me and just stick to them. So as soon as we reached high school and the students were able to realize that I can find other friends with the same interest, those bonds broke apart very quickly.
Okay.
Because I wasn't developing friendships. I was developing activities at recess, right?
Yes. Which is on a superficial level, right? You had a common interest. We can do this activity together, but there wasn't that ability to go deep and develop that deeper friendship, perhaps, and really get to know one another.
Exactly. That's what made it so difficult. And it felt like every day was a war and I was fighting it. Like the way that I define it is that every single day, everything you believe to be true is wrong. And every time you change your mind, the answers change to the same questions.
Wow.
Every moment it felt like I had to give up what I believed to be true because I would be proven to be wrong about it within days. For instance, if I were to believe that friendships were making sacrifices for other students, I believe that that would be true. And maybe on a bigger sense, it would be true. But the way I would act it out is I could throw my backpack at a student and say, you can borrow this for the day, right? It would be something like that. That just wouldn't make any sense. And then the student would assume that this is a sort of hostility. At that moment, a teacher would come in and bring down the law on me and I would get sent home. So that happened every day when I believe something was right and to some extent was right, but I was shown for it to be wrong because I was not able to express it in a correct way.
Wow, I'm just trying to imagine what that was like to almost not trust yourself. This is all you know, and you're figuring it out as you go along. And yet the world around you kept trying to correct it or you'd get into trouble, and you thought you were doing the right thing.
That's right. It's funny, actually, because I just put an ungodly amount of faith in people because my understanding was if I'm wrong, then they must be right. So every time that I was in a group project, I would concede my points.
Oh.
And now as an adult, I'm seeing that as a sort of trauma because I am having a hard time now to voice my opinion and express who I am. And it stems from the understanding that I am implicitly wrong and reducing the confidence I have in my own ideas.
Wow. So is it something then that you're kind of practicing at in trusting you now in what you've learned and that you actually have a lot of really good ideas?
Oh yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm trying to step into. Certainly it's sort of familiar in a way because it feels like the days when I was trying to educate myself on social behaviors and going against what was natural in that sense and re-educating myself. But instead of it being about social behaviors, I feel like I'm re-educating myself on my own confidence and going against what's natural in that sense.
Like, I just think about how the elementary school, middle school, high school years can be kind of challenging at times, especially because every kid there is still trying to figure out life. And they can be kind of cruel and it can be difficult to navigate anyway, just that whole culture of high school. Has it been easier as an adult to trust the adults around you to be respectful towards you in that process of learning?
I think all of us have become more respectful over the years because there's just a general sense of ignorance that is pinnacle with that age, with the middle school and elementary school age. But I do think that where there is a challenge is that everything has gotten so much more spread out. It's almost like, and maybe I'll be able to please your scientific audiences with this metaphor, but it's almost like the beginning of the universe, that it all begins in a dense, condensed state, and it expands and grows with time, and everything becomes further apart. And it's not that there's more or less of something, but it's like that same amount of matter is spread amongst a bigger space. It feels like this. It feels like I have further to reach to connect with people because everyone is less accessible. There's less people in my vicinity. So whether or not I experience more or less pain from my autism, it's almost like it's less to do with age and more to do with less potential for incidences.
I see. For those interactions.
Generally, people are more mature, which means that I'm able to communicate and have them understand better what I'm saying. And I'm more mature, which means my language has become more refined. But that doesn't stop subtle forms of misunderstanding like the ones I described from occurring, which implies to me that given the opportunity, there would certainly be a large percentage of people that would not understand or accept my personality.
Well, and maybe with that in mind, as you're meeting people now, as you come into whether it's the youth where you're working with or the adults in your life that you might meet, do you explain it or do you just be yourself and only if it comes up do you address it?
Right. That's pretty much what I do. I just wait for it to come up. I am myself. I am my own person. People don't realize, they don't think that I'm autistic, but then I bring it up at some point when it's convenient. Sometimes they'll say, well, I haven't said this before, but I do have autism. And in those moments, people are taken aback. They think about it and they don't realize. They'd say, I didn't know. And usually after a while, they either have a response of, I see it now, I can understand it, or just generally nothing really changes. And the only times I talk about it is when I am either giving a sermon and I'm talking about my testimony because it's just an unavoidable part of my life, or, somebody asks and wants to know, like what we're doing right now. But I try not to make it a very, very defining force of who I am, because ever since I was a kid, I always believed that I shouldn't be defined by what I am struggling to do. It just felt like I would rather be defined by what I accomplish and what I believe.
Wow, I love that. I celebrate that for you, for sure. So are there other aspects of autism that you maybe can speak to that would help others understand it a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, I think what I really want people to understand about autism is that it shouldn't make you want to treat anyone differently. I think a common idea is that when someone has autism, you have to change the way you interact. And I would say they don't need to have autism for that to be true. I think that you should change the way you interact with people based on who you interact with because of what they need as an individual. I don't think it has anything to do with autism. I think that, like I said, I think autism is in many ways a personality, a characteristic of an individual. Like any personality, there's healthy personalities and unhealthy personalities. And the unhealthy personality would be one of apathy, one of giving up. There's no hope. I've met a lot of autistic youth that have that trait, and it doesn't serve them well because all that happens is they begin to think that the world's against them, which is what I believe for a long time. Mm-hmm. Certainly, you have more obstacles, but a healthy autistic individual would be able to recognize the obstacles and seek to navigate through life with the obstacles at hand. But for people who are neurotypical or just generally interact with an autistic individual, the only thing that I believe, at least in my experience, and I don't speak for all autistic individuals because it's a very broad spectrum, but in my experience, what is most validating is just sheer honesty and authenticity, because we can't tell when you're being polite and when you're being honest. Jokes are very hard. I think about, have you watched the movie Guardians of the Galaxy?
I think a long time ago, yes.
Yeah, there's a character, but he is a very stern, very harsh and lawful character.
Okay.
I think it's Drax the Destroyer. And I related to Drax. When I was younger, I related to Drax, even though that movie came out when I was older. Because Drax doesn't understand the jokes that are being made. They fly over his head. That sarcasm is literal. Making fun of you in a very kind way is offensive. Everything is literal because that's the way I interpreted the world. Like, for example, I remember one day a student said, "You got a haircut," and then he made a comment, something along the lines of like, one haircut or all haircuts, right? All your hair's cut. And it was a joke, but that stumped me. I was completely frozen. I just didn't understand what he was saying. I was almost like, are you making fun of me? Because this is like not what happened. And are you saying that it's just like off? Like I couldn't process it. And that's just a silly example, because I think that if an autistic individual doesn't learn satire, sarcasm, humor, perspectives, then the literal is the only way that at least I could interpret comments made by individuals.
That's a great example. I love your anecdotes of things that we've all said probably over the years and never really thought about it, because, yeah, a lot of people might get that as a joke. How do you respond then in that moment? How do you let people know if you're not getting it? Do you clarify? Do you just let it go?
You know, it's very situational. Like, honestly, I have laughed at so many jokes that I don't understand. My sense of humor is nonsensical, I think, at this point, because I don't think I had a sense of humor when I was a kid. I think that I just laughed at what everyone laughed at and then considered whatever was being said to be funny. And that defined my sense of humor, which is very crazy. But I generally don't bring it up, because I find that by standing out and saying that what you're saying doesn't make sense to me, one, ruins the joke, and two, sort of makes the other person feel invalidated. And to me, that is the most important part of being autistic, is receiving validation, just because it was so rare. So I find it hard to invalidate another person for my own sake, at least where it's intentional.
Well, I can hear the mixed feelings in that. Like I'm feeling mixed just for your behalf. Like on one hand, you're really not getting it, but you don't want to hurt them. And so there is an awareness there that's come with maturity. It's kind of like, I know that I don't get jokes. They're obviously telling a joke I don't understand. But at the same time, it makes me wonder how much you've had to give up of who you are in order to please others or to try to fit in.
Yeah, that was something that led into a bit of a, like a crisis later in life, like 19, 20, 21. It left me feeling like I wasn't sure of what kind of person I was. And the best example I could give is I was a Pokemon addict as a kid. I loved Pokemon. I had so much merch, and whatever I could access, that's just what I latched onto. And I related to this one Pokemon called Ditto, because Ditto has one move and only one move, which is transform, and it can become the Pokemon it's battling. And that's the way I think I navigated through life. I just transformed who I was to fit the given situation so that it wouldn't cause any confrontation.
I've got goosebumps just hearing that. And nobody would have known just how much you were transforming. And I know that as adolescents, they might do that a fair amount just to fit in. But I want to take that to the 100th degree for you in just how much energy it must have taken over the years to try to adapt. And yet it's almost like being in a culture where you don't know the language.
That's right.
Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit, Santiago? Because I really think that's a key point here.
Yes. I think that this is the best way I can describe what it's like to live with autism to people, because every single subtle cue that you give indicates something to someone, things that I cannot think about. Tone, language, posture, eye contact, shoulders, like these are very minute traits. And if I don't think about them individually in every given conversation, then they fall into an unsociable ball of mess. It's too much. So what I had to do is learn that language, learn the language of socializing with people, the language of being heard, and applying it feels like learning a second language. And for anyone who has learned a second language, there's this sense of linguistic fatigue that I describe it as. It's like the more you speak your second language, the more tired you become and the less eloquent the language is. So I speak, for example, Spanish and a bit of Portuguese. And in my experience of speaking those languages for long periods of time while traveling, I want to resort to English. And I seek, whenever I find an English place, I get this relief, this relaxed state.
Okay.
And that's what happens when I interact with too many people for too long, is I get fatigued, because it takes so much energy to communicate with people that I eventually want to go back into my awkward, unintelligible state.
Well, it makes sense that you'd need to rest. Like that would take, from what you're describing, a great deal of energy just to be working that hard at it. And it's important, and I can appreciate that you've been leaning into this and really trying to understand it and figure it out for your sake as well, so that you can expand your world a little bit. And I can hear how important that is to you. But at the same time, you can't work at it all the time, right?
You know, in fact, in this very interaction, that's what's happening, is I'm being very conscious about my tone and about my words, because that's the only thing that people are going to be able to interpret. So in some sense, this culture of COVID Zoom calls has actually provided me more energy, because there's so much less of information to put out.
Oh, interesting.
And a lot of people have the reverse effect. For a lot of people, these phone calls are debilitating. And to me, I think it's because they are operating on a different language, just like I am. And the way that they interpret the information and provide the information is foreign and requires a different set of thinking. And it's not foreign in the sense that they can't understand it. It's just not the way they're familiar with, so that it just drains them. And they just think, I can't understand what he's thinking. I can't get his posture correctly. I can't see his eyes. It's too difficult to interpret what he's saying. And they just shut down and they say, I'm done for the day. And that's what it's like every day when I interact with people in the real world.
I bet people are going to relate to that. Absolutely. So one other question that comes to mind, Santiago, is I'm wondering who have been some really important people along the way in your life that have maybe been a great support to you or have made a difference?
I would say that there's a couple, and there's probably so many other people that are just there and made a big difference, and they just didn't stand out in the same way. But two individuals stand out a lot to me. And the first one is my youth pastor. When I was a teenager, made such an effort to reach out to me that it transformed who I was as a person. When I was in high school, I went to a youth group, and my friend Quentin, he was the youth pastor. He put a lot of time to talk to me during the youth group, meet with me after the youth group, go out for coffee, listen to my intelligible rant. He actually says to this day that it took a lot of energy for him to communicate with me because it was so difficult to deal with all that. And that was when I've already improved, right? Because at that point, the second person in my life came into play already, because I met him around 14 and I met this other person around 13, 14. Her name is Jennifer Algie. And I have so much respect for her. I hope that she listens to this podcast because I would love to connect with her again. She was a psychiatrist, and she ran a program called Transitions, which the goal of the program was to prepare students for life outside of high school and into professional workplace scenarios. And it was specifically designed for people on the spectrum. And it taught me every single skill that I learned to interact with people. It was a course from grade 9 to grade 12.
Wow.
And Jennifer Algie and Denise, I don't know Denise's last name, but they essentially changed my life so that I could see the world through other people's points of view. And that was a process.
I bet. And I can hear just over the years with maturity, but also that support, how much these people have made a really important impression on you and speaking into your life, but also holding space for you to have a voice at a time where you were always trying to conform, but have people that just listened to who Santiago is and how you were thinking about things.
Right. And I mean, it would be bereft of compassion to not include my mother. She put probably the most work out of any individual out there. And, you know, every mother will deal with a lot. We don't always agree with things being the right choice, but what she did for me was also, you know, tantamount to my success, dealing with paperwork and psychiatrists and schooling, you know, like it just couldn't be here without her too.
I bet. Yes. I think about your mom, and not knowing your mom, but I would imagine every mother worries for their young person. And I just knowing other parents as well who have had to advocate loudly for their kids to get that help. And you can see with your moves how it took a while to get into the system, to get the help you would have needed. I'm sure she spent countless hours just either getting you to appointments or advocating for you to get that help.
I didn't even realize until I became an adult, because as a kid, it's, you know, you like, there's something I'm learning now, which is you don't realize as a kid that you're watching your parents age, and that humanizes them, because I think they're dehumanized as a kid and you don't realize the pain that they go through. And now I do.
Well, I'm sure she'd love to hear that, Santiago. So kudos to your mom. And maybe as we get ready to wrap up today, I want to just see if there's anything else that we've missed that you would really like the listeners to know, or any final comments.
Maybe if I were to give a good point to wrap up on, is that autism, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of thinking to just do everyday social activities. So the biggest consideration I ask for people is just to think about that. And when you do interact with someone with autism, it might be a little scary because you don't know what they're thinking and how they might react. So really, the biggest thing that they'll want from people is to be affirmed, just to be understood. I see a lot of autistic kids fall into darkness, sort of like a cloud is over them. Really, what they need is just somebody to agree with them to some extent, because I don't believe that autistic children are wrong. I don't believe that they say things that are just factually incorrect. I think it's just the way they present it, but they need that affirmation because their experience is not invalid. Really, it's just find a way to validate it to some extent.
Yeah, really solid point, because that will help grow the confidence to continue having a voice and explore the possibilities of many perspectives. But like you're saying, often part of that is true. It's going to feel mean to them, or it's going to feel like it could feel hurtful. And I really have listened to what you've said today and the importance of giving you a voice.
That's right. That's why this is very exciting.
Good. I am just so pleased that we could have this conversation and provide a platform to share your perspective, Santiago. And I think you've really captured a series of really solid ideas that I think are worthwhile sharing. And I appreciate your vulnerability to put yourself out there and to use this opportunity to educate and help others in their interactions with people with autism.
Thank you. It was really nice to be here and just get to a place that is healthy for having a dialogue around the subject and encouraging to discuss.
Well, I hope that you'll continue to have more platforms. And I know that you're speaking into young people's lives and helping them as a youth pastor. And I have no doubt that there's going to be more opportunities.
Thank you.
As a high-functioning autistic person and an amazing human being, I am humbled by Santiago's insights. This has felt like we were just given a little glimpse into the experience of living with autism. What if, as Santiago suggests, we saw autism as a personality, not a disability? Would this help to bridge the gap between empathy and acceptance? Hearing that validation is another aspect of Santiago's experience that was missing for him speaks to the importance of honoring another person's perspective, even if we do not see the world the same way. What if we remained curious, asked questions, and sought to understand? As Santiago mentioned in this episode, he should not be defined by what he is struggling to do. I also have a new appreciation for the effort and energy it takes for someone with autism to navigate a conversation or inside jokes. Understanding this through the lens of linguistic fatigue highlights the effort it takes to remain in conversation with others over a long period of time. To quote Santiago, "You can empathize with autistic people, but autistic people can't empathize with you." In being authentic, honest, and literal, you provide a clearer means of communicating with someone who is on the autism spectrum. So many things that many of us take for granted. After hearing how challenging it can be to navigate the social cues or truly understand the emotions of others, I really admire the fact that Santiago would intentionally get involved in helping youth who are perhaps going through the similar challenges as he did. This is the value of having someone speak into your life who can relate in some way to your journey. This conversation with Santiago has felt like a gift. Although he was so grateful to have this platform to his story shared with each one of you, by taking the time to listen and perhaps learn from Santiago, you are creating space for him to truly be heard. As Carl Jung, a well-known psychiatrist, once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." As you go about your week, I invite you to consider who you might know that might also benefit from having an opportunity to share their story. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Resilience Project. We would not be doing this podcast without you. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story or is helping to build resilience in their community, please email me at cindy@aresilienceproject.com. In fact, email me either way. I would love to hear from you. My hope is to feature an episode periodically on your letters of resilience. I'm very interested in hearing your story of how you have tackled hard things and what worked for you. With your permission, I hope to share some of these stories along the way with our listeners. Also, check out my website, aresilienceproject.com, to learn more about our amazing guests. Your presence here is important because together we are cultivating a village of resilient individuals. You are creating a space for their stories to be shared and a sacred space for learning to occur. I also have a favor. I would love for you to go to your preferred podcast platform, rate and review the podcast so that we will know how we're doing. I also would like to express my gratitude to the amazing team of volunteers that have jumped on board to support this project. You will find each of those beautiful people on my website on the team page. As you go about this week, I invite you to think about one way that you can continue to grow your resilient muscle. What is one thing you can start with today? See you next week.
Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca